Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm so excited today to have Aaron Tomlinson on again, the resident expert on the Bible and so many other things. I learned so much. Go check out our first episode where I talked to Aaron about everything from Book of Revelation to Edgar Casey. And I have such tremendous respect for Aaron and his knowledge of the Bible and where he's coming from. I've learned so much. And so I was doing some research on the Merkaba and then started looking into Melchizedek in the Bible and started seeing it popping up in all these different places, not even in the Bible. And I found out Aaron is somewhat of an expert, had done some research on it himself. So it gave me an excuse to bring him back on and ask him how he thinks the Broncos are going to do next year. So welcome to the Reality Revolution, Aaron.
Hey, Brian, thank you. It's great to be on your channel. I appreciate the work you're doing, and it's just an honor to be one of your guests again. So,
oh, thanks, man.
And we'll see if we have an NFL season, huh? Who knows?
We'll see. They had a good draft, man. Jerry Jeudy looks like a good receiver. So, as lifelong Bronco fan, you're always optimistic right now. It's
absolutely
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
sometimes I feel like I'm coming home to an abusive relationship. But
it is a little bit of that, but it's going to be really weird. Just sports in general this year. It's just going to be really weird. Even the way I interact with it's not going to be the same. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how this affects sports in the future in general. But so we in our first interview, you had mentioned offhand briefly that there may be something to the Merkaba. And I've started mentioning this in some other podcasts. By the time people are watching this, they have probably tried my Merkaba meditation, which is based on Drimbalo Melchizedek. But I wanted, when this information, it resonated with me. It felt like some sort of memory or something to it. It had some authenticity. But of course, I'm going to go and research everything I possibly can on it. And the Merkaba is very fascinating. I mean, we see the six-pointed star for the Israeli flag. When we see the mention of in Ezekiel, which people can imply that he was seeing a Merkaba. And I was like, I got to talk to Aaron because I just don't know it. So what is first of all, when you had said that, what did you mean? We were talking about chakra systems, I think, at the time.
Okay.
Tell me what your impression of this as a biblical scholar.
Yeah, sure. So I got interested in this. I didn't even know anything about the Merkaba or what's known as Merkaba mysticism within Judaism, within ancient Judaism, until a few years ago. I was reading Ezekiel chapter 1. And anybody who's ever tried to read Ezekiel chapter 1 and just try to conceptualize that in your brain, it's impossible to do, right? But I got really drawn into it and discovered that between the time of the Babylonian captivity and the time of Christ, that Ezekiel chapter 1 was one of the primary passages of rabbinic interest, and that there was a whole stream of Judaism that was known as Merkaba mysticism. Now, Merkaba is a Jewish word or a Hebrew word that means something to ride in. It's literally what it translates to, something to ride in. And it's not mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 1, but it is mentioned in the book of, I think it's 2 Kings, like around chapter 4, chapter 6. I can't remember. I should have looked it up before the podcast. But where Elijah is taken up into heaven and his mantle falls down to his servant Elisha, and he's taken up in a chariot, the English says. And the word chariot there is the Hebrew word Merkaba. And so the ancient, Jewish mystics were interested in this whole idea of a chariot or a thing to ride in, whereby they could ascend through the heavens into the very throne of God and be transformed into the same image, basically. And so then what I discovered through researching all of this was that it dramatically impacted Christianity. In other words, the early Christians were the heirs of this form of Jewish mysticism, and you can see it throughout in the Bible. For example, when Saul of Tarsus, who later becomes the Apostle Paul, when he's on the road to Damascus and he has the experience where he sees the heavens open, he's having in the context of the day a Merkaba experience.
Right.
And when Stephen, later in Acts chapter 7, is being stoned, being killed, he sees the heavens open. He begins to speak about it. And it was at that point, actually, that they began to kill him, because he was speaking about an open heaven. And that was forbidden by rabbinic literature. If you had a Merkaba experience, you were forbidden to talk about it in public.
Really?
Yeah.
You couldn't talk. So it's interesting. People are reading that as chariot, and that may not be a very good translation of the word. The Merkaba, right. It's not a chariot. It's right. Something a lot more. So, okay, that's a first huge. It's just so frustrating how often you hear mistranslations that completely skew your belief system for years. I mean, I did not know that Merkaba was translated as chariot.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So why would they make it illegal to have the Merkaba to relate that? And what would be is it a power structure? They're worried about first thing that comes to mind, they're worried about questioning their own power structure. Is that the reason?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that's probably true. If you read the rabbinic literature, they put warnings in there about the dangers of it. That it was dangerous. You could relate it to, fire can cook your food or it can burn your house down.
Right.
Depending on how you use it or misuse it. And so they were afraid of people who would misuse the realities of this, because in the Merkaba, they believed were all the mysteries of the universe and the ability to not only ascend and have sublime experiences of God, but to be able to bring the power of God back into the earth to produce change on the physical realm. So the rabbis, they spoke in that way. An interesting scholar named Margaret Barker talks about how there were competing streams or competing parties, I guess would be a better way to say it, within ancient Judaism. And you have the legalists on the one hand, the people who were interested in the law and interested in people following the law, who their scribes were under King Josiah. So they were underneath the kings.
Right.
And so they were interested in consolidating their power in Jerusalem and consolidating their political power. And they write, according to Margaret Barker, they're the ones who write the strongest prohibitions within the scriptures themselves about seeking mystical experiences.
Right. It's interesting.
So I do think it's this idea of if we can, because the later writers and the way Jewish mysticism evolved, the Merkaba then becomes the light body, or becomes the soul.
Right.
It becomes the vehicle then of ascension. And so I think, there is this pull or this conflict between those who are seeking direct experience of the sublime and those who don't want you to have a direct experience because they want to control you.
But they don't mention the shape of the Merkaba. It's just referred to. That comes from other. So when you have, on a personal level, I know that I had mentioned in my messages I was just, Drambala Melchizedek is one, but it's also mentioned, it's not just exclusively with him. Using and understanding the shape of the Merkaba, has this been something that you've experienced or tried to integrate into because it's so bizarre. It's not normal. It's not your normal thing, that I'm imagining geometric figures, and your initial instinct is this is just bizarre. And part of me says the bizarreness of it may be why there's some validity to it. And I'm always questioning stuff, but I wanted to know your personal experience once you started to explore that.
Yeah, that's I did for a season do the meditation, Drambala's meditation, practiced it. And it was during a crazy season in my life, 2017, when I was trying everything. Right. Not drugs, but everything mystical and spiritual that I could
Which I think is part of the normal spiritual path at certain points, right?
It is. And I did have some very, very profound experiences during that season that were, definitely supernatural, definitely metaphysical and undeniable. Whether or not that could be directly correlated with the Merkaba meditation or not, I don't know, because I didn't stick with it enough.
Right.
And maybe that's because I hated geometry in school. I don't know.
Right. Well, I think that I also tend to, as he emphasizes, there is an instinctual aspect to our connection to the light body. And it may not be important for us to really know the structure of it, because there's a part of our deep knowing that already knows the structure of it and already spins the Merkaba. It's kind of a mail for the people that really need the details of it. It's kind of for that small group of people that need that. But I don't think it's mandatory for people to be aware of these geometry. I just think it's just that for that spiritual seeker that needs the specific information. That was at least my impression.
I think that's absolutely correct, and I think that would also correlate pretty well with the way the mystics then came to understand the chariot. So one of the things you'll find in mystical writings are people that they call the chariot riders. These would be the mystics who had ascension type experiences, meaning experiences of altered states of consciousness where they experienced what they describe as paradise, or what they describe as heaven, or what they describe as God. And so that's kind of a term both within Jewish mysticism and Christian mysticism, the chariot rider.
Right. Interesting. Okay, now I'm going to go back through my Bible and start looking for references to the chariot. So
and open heaven, that's really the key. The heavens open.
Heavens open.
That was really key, because there was the whole mystical culture of that time was based on a body of literature called the Hekalat, or the literature of the palaces. It's the Hebrew word for the palaces. And the idea was this idea that you could ascend by knowing the secret names of God and knowing the secret angelic names, which still comes into play in practical Kabbalah today, and even some of the occult orders like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and that kind of stuff.
Right. It's very interesting. So as I was researching this, and then I was researching Drumbo Melchizedek, and that name, and then in one of his videos, he talks about a Melchizedek consciousness. And then I see it referred to in Gnostic writings. And of course, Jesus was a member of the Melchizedek. And then I start seeing it everywhere. It's in Urantia. The Urantia papers have the Melchizedek, and then Paul Selig is channeling the Melchizedek. And I'm like, it's everywhere. And then I said, I'm going to ask you about the Melchizedek. And you were like, oh yeah, I've been studying that. So it's not, there's a character that's a Melchizedek, right? And then there's a group of, I don't know, explain to me, for people watching who maybe don't even know Melchizedek, the reason I'm interested is the mystery of it. There seems to be something more to it. So tell me your impression of it biblically.
Yeah, so my study of Melchizedek is strictly biblical, but it's something I've been interested in for ever. So and it's interesting too, Brian, because there's not a lot in the Bible about Melchizedek. He shows up in Genesis 14,
right?
Meets Abram, whose name has not yet been changed to Abram, after he has this battle with the kings, and he gives Melchizedek a tithe. That's the first tithe in the Bible.
Right.
He gives him a tithe of the spoils, and Melchizedek brings out the bread and the wine. So it's kind of like the first communion, or what we would think of as communion meal in the scriptures as well. And then David is referred to in one of the Psalms. And darn if I can't remember which one. I can't believe I can't remember which one. But in one of the Psalms, he's referred to as being a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So you have Melchizedek, the person in Genesis. Then in Psalms, you have the order of Melchizedek.
Right.
And then the book of Hebrews expands on that a lot, quite a bit. But that's the only other place it's talked about in the Bible specifically where there's a specific reference to Melchizedek. Right. But the interesting thing that about it in Hebrews is the writer of Hebrews, when he begins talking about Jesus being after the order of Melchizedek, he says, these are the deeper things. This is the meat. He says, I want to go more into detail about these things, but you're not mature enough to handle it yet. I can feed you only with milk and not with meat.
Right. So you get the impression that the order of Melchizedek is on a much higher level, and there's much more going on, and that Jesus had to go through this order as a part of his initiation and awakening. Possibly, that's my impression.
Oh, definitely. I think Hebrews is definitely saying that. Now, one thing, Bible scholars are divided over who was Melchizedek,
right?
And what a lot of Christian scholars try to say is that the Melchizedek that Abraham met was Jesus, because they're hung up on the Trinity and the deity of Christ and finding Christ in the Old Testament. But the writer of Hebrews makes it clear that it wasn't Jesus, that he came after the order of Melchizedek, that he came in the likeness of Melchizedek.
In the likeness right.
Yeah, it says he came in the likeness of Melchizedek. But he says something really interesting in Hebrews. He says Melchizedek having no genealogy, having no beginning or end of days.
So he showed up out of nowhere?
Yeah. That's what the writer of Hebrews is saying. So he's literally saying he wasn't of necessarily the human.
Maybe he's from another planet.
He wasn't of Earth. He wasn't from the human race. And he brings out this idea that there's this eternal priesthood, eternal consciousness, like you're talking about. And Jesus exactly had to come through that initiation and became a high priest after the order of Melchizedek.
Now, has any scholars tried to look for that order of Melchizedek, actual order? Was there a building? Was there a group? Did they have specific beliefs? Obviously, we want the meat. So do you know of anybody that's found more information about that?
Yeah. I don't know about like a secret order necessarily. Right. But definitely the Dead Sea Scrolls. In fact, there's a whole book found among the Dead Sea Scrolls called the Melchizedek Scroll.
And it treats Melchizedek kind of like a Christ figure.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it definitely does. And it fit in with the mysticism part of it as well. The thing that's so interesting about Melchizedek and Abram is when you translate Melchizedek's name from the Hebrew. So ancient Hebrew were glyphs. They were pictures, not just letters. They were also served as numbers. So there was a lot of meaning in each particular Hebrew letter. And Melchizedek's name starts with a mem, which was a symbol of water, but also understood as consciousness. But numerically, his name descends in numerical order. So when you look at the numbers of the words or the letters that are in the name, there's a descending order that's taking place. So you almost get this idea of consciousness that's descending or coming down from a higher place.
Right.
Now, Abram has a mem also at the end of his name. And so you see the joining of these two coming together, and you see an exchange taking place. Abram giving the tithe, and the writer of Hebrews brings that back to the seed that he was carrying, or his generations that were to come. And so there's some kind of a exchange that's happening generationally, or happening perhaps even within the DNA, if that makes sense. But what's so interesting is that right after that, so that's Genesis chapter 14. In Genesis chapter 15, it says, after these things is when Abram has the vision of God. He has a vision of God, and God appears to him and says, I'm your shield, your exceeding great reward. And Abram says, what are you going to give me? And he begins to give him the promise of Isaac and the promise of a seed that would come that would carry the blessing. So it was after he met Melchizedek that he was able to receive this consciousness, and he was able to have the vision of his life and of the seed that was to come. So it's some really fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. So there's a secret dude or order behind it all that's just kind of offhand referred to that people are not really talking about. It's interesting that I have been to so many standard religious Christian services, the blessing and singing. I've never heard reference to Melchizedek, not a single time in so many services. It's because it's partially unknown, but these clues are dropped. So,
listen, Brian, I went to Bible school and got a bachelor's degree, and never heard about Melchizedek or anything about the order of Melchizedek. I don't know that I've ever heard a message on Melchizedek. I've preached.
I've never heard a message on it. I know what it would be, but if Jesus was wouldn't it be important if Jesus was actually a part of a order? Wouldn't we want to know more about it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Bible does paint it as this eternal thing. It says, Jesus did not come after fleshly ordinances, meaning he did not come from the line of Levi, which was the line out of which the Jewish priesthood arose, but he said he came by the power of an endless life, by the order of Melchizedek. So it describes Melchizedek as not having genealogy, as having the power of an endless life, as all kinds of just really cool stuff that seem to pertain to the importance of who Jesus is, at least the writer of Hebrews. And yet it's really left, as far as I can tell, uninvestigated by most people, and most Christians and most churches don't even touch it.
Right. Now, do you see any other references? We were talking earlier about the Merkaba and the sacred geometry. Is there any other references to geometries in the Bible? That's something I obviously the cross has its own meaning, and some people imply that there's more to the cross than just the historical precedence of what Jesus went through, but actually it has symbolic meaning. What is your impression of using these different geometries in the Bible?
Well, it's definitely present in the Bible, because you have very specific geometric measurements for the ark that Noah built.
Right, the cubits, and right.
Very specific geometric measurements for the tabernacle that Moses built. Very specific geometric measurements for the temples, and also for the New Jerusalem, which is a cube.
Right.
The city is a cube. It's again, that whole 144,000 sort of 12,000 or multiples of 12 becomes important within the geometric shape of the New Jerusalem. So I imagine there have been people that have plumbed the mysteries of that and the depths of that, but I wouldn't be one of them.
So you just brought up something I would love to ask you about, because I get questions on mine. I did a episode where Neville Goddard gives his impression of the 144,000 in the Revelation as being the number of man, including all of man. But I get these comments on my YouTube. You're not, only 144,000 are going to make it. That's it. There's only 144,000 that are ever going to make it out of the billions of people. Perhaps it's just BS or just the delusions of that person in Revelation. But if it has meaning, what is your interpretation of it? How have you been able to access that?
Yeah, so I think it's important to realize in the beginning of the book of Revelation, it says, that it's the revelation of Jesus Christ that God gave to Jesus, and he sent his angel to the Apostle John to receive it. But it says it was signified in the first. It was sent and signified or signified. And the original Greek term there means it was sent in a symbolic form. So you're being told at the very beginning of the book, don't read this literally. Right. This needs to be read symbolically. A lot of people don't realize that the book of Revelation almost never made it into the Bible. And if the book of Revelation had never made it into the Bible, nobody would even know what it is. It'd be as obscure as the order of Melchizedek. Right. It made it in by one vote and by a negotiation. By one vote. Yeah, and by a negotiation amongst the bishops that were deciding the canon of Scripture, and also with a concession, and the concession was this: that it be used only for liturgy and prayer, and that it never be used to teach any kind of doctrine in the church.
Well, too bad they ignored that, right?
Right. And so the people that gave you the Bible said, don't teach from it.
Right.
And they said, definitely don't take it literally, right? And so that's the first mistake that people make. So everything in the book of Revelation, according to the author himself, is coming as a sign. It's coming as a symbol. It's coming in symbolic and metaphoric form, which is why it's so difficult to interpret. And there can be millions of different interpretations. Picture paints 1,000 words, right? But one thing's for sure, the 144,000 then is not a literal number of people who are going to be saved, or the only ones that are going to be saved, or the ones that are going to be taken through the tribulation or anything like that. Right. So again, I think it's a symbolic number. I think Neville's probably onto something there. I think it has something to do with fullness and maturity. Excuse me. Right. And so the 144,000 have the name of God on their foreheads. They're sort of like the army of God in the tribulation. I think it's a maturity of consciousness that humanity is being brought into, that's being spoken of there, rather than a specific group of people or a literal number of people. That
makes sense. People might be surprised if this is the first time that they're listening to Aaron, this incredible biblical scholar. that you have also had your own spiritual journey where you've had to say, a lot of the stuff I learned was wrong.
Yep.
It's misinformation, and it's actually hurting other people.
Yep.
And it takes a lot of guts for somebody in your position, in a leadership position, in a Christian order church, to come out and say, you know what I've been teaching has been wrong, and it may have hurt people. We can clearly see that you got the knowledge, you went to school. So I'm so impressed by your courage, because you very easily could have just stayed at what you were doing. It was a job, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
I did it for 20 years.
Right. So talk about that, because even if people don't agree with you, there's courage in what you did. And you saw that the way that the church was affecting people in their own spiritual journey, and that it was working against them. I have seen the same thing. I'm still saying there are truths that we can find in the Bible, but the organization of the church right now saddens me, is the best way I can say it. It saddens me. People that are really seeking God, that really have they're good hearts, that want to be good and do the right things, are being misled. I wanted to get your impressions of your story about that. I mean, maybe we didn't go about that as much in the last interview.
Yeah. I don't remember if we did. So, I was perfectly happy doing what I was doing.
Right.
I was successful at doing what I was doing. My church was voted the #1 place of worship 2 years in a row. I was voted, I took place in a local, award for best mover and shaker. I was doing mission work. I was traveling, preaching to thousands of people. I was consulting for churches. So, I was quite happy doing what I was doing. Yeah. And then on August 13th, 2016, I had just in meditation, I was taken up into this experience and had this experience. We'll just say that it's on my YouTube channel. If people want to, hear the whole thing, they can go to my YouTube channel and hear it. But when I came out of that experience, it was like the veil had been lifted from my own eyes in terms of my own problems, my own mental and emotional and spiritual problems that I was having that I did not see before. It was like an unveiling of my own blind spot. And when I came out of that experience, I could not deny the reality of the dysfunction, the patterns in my life where I was generating things that were not healthy. And so I began to examine that, began to explore that, and found out that a lot of it was because of these toxic, and I mean absolutely toxic, views of God that I had taken from the scriptures, that I had been indoctrinated into, toxic views of self that I had taken from scripture and been indoctrinated into, and then also indoctrinated others into. And once I was able to fully let go and realize this is toxic, this is killing me, this is what I thought was the cure is actually the poison.
Yeah.
And I was able to let go of those toxic beliefs and flush them out of my system, then everything in my life changed. My entire I just got so much more mentally and emotionally healthy and calm and peaceful, and everything that I was looking for when I joined into Christianity and was following it and pursuing it and evangelizing others and giving it to others, everything that I was looking for, but somehow seemed to elude me, I was able to find once I was able to kind of reject some of those things, but yet not reject the reality of God, not reject the reality of the spiritual dimensions and worlds, but be able to find that you can have a relationship with God, you can have a spiritual connection, and you can be fruitful outside of the traditional Christian understanding and the traditional Christian faith. And again, I would say for me, it was toxic. I'm also a professional counselor, so I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. And I've counseled a lot of people who had anxiety disorders, who had obsessive compulsive disorder, who were suffering with depression, and it was all because of the toxic frames of religion.
Which goes so deep, we're taught these things at such a young age. They can literally create an imprint for our entire lives, and subconscious beliefs that create our reality from what I believe in reality creation. And it's frightening because it's coming from a place where people are wanting to reach God. And I see it all the time. How much you were part of the business of Christianity.
Absolutely.
So how much of that, the business of Christianity, is defining the message now? It's not just about the message, it's the business of it.
Brian, I would say, so I got really into this in 1989.
Right.
So I have, a couple decades or more behind me in this. And there was all I can say is there was a purity to the mission and the message in the late 80s when I came into it that I don't see anywhere at all today.
Right.
To me, it seems that the vast majority of it, now I'm not saying there aren't sincere people out there. I'm not saying from my perception, it is almost entirely driven by the almighty dollar, from the Christian music industry to Christian television, to mega churches. And, a lot of pastors, something happened where it shifted from, reaching the world with the gospel and doing benevolent works like charity works and things like that. That was the goal of churches. That was the goal of the church that I grew up in, for sure. That was the goal of the churches that I was a part of. And I can honestly say with integrity, I hated the business side of it.
Right.
So we always had a wholesome mission and vision to reach and help people. But so many pastors would get this pressure where they would define success in terms of numbers and dollars and sizes of your building. And, you'd sit in these leadership conferences or pastor conferences. And, at the time, maybe I had 60 people in my church, and they would come and say, how big is your church? And you say 60 people. They literally would stop the conversation and go find someone else to talk to because you weren't successful enough for them. So I started giving people
the heart of one person.
Yeah.
Then it's work. That's the thing that,
Yeah. So a lot of it is driven by that. To answer your question, I was making a joke. I was going to ask people the square footage of my church instead of how big is your church. Well, it's 12,000. 12,000. How come I never heard of you?
My girlfriend had brought me when we were dating to a big service here in Orange County. And I'm going to go. She wants me to go. It's cool. And so there's some great songs, beautiful production value. And then for 20 minutes, I hear about his book, the pastor's book at this, and it had nothing to do with Christianity or any spiritual lesson. And then he was telling us where to buy the book. And then for another 20 minutes, it was all politics, which we're not supposed to hear, I guess. But I was literally told on who to vote for and was given misinformation that I knew was clearly disinformation about people. And people are just, I'm looking around and I've seen people, and I'm like, where is the spiritual message? Where is the spiritual message? Now that's once, but maybe I was attracted to that. Maybe there was a part of me that was, okay, you got to see this. I don't know, because I know there's more, but I've seen that in multiple different church services where it's an object they're selling, a program that they want you to do. Please donate to me. And it's just sad because there's some real truths in Christianity that can still be shared and help people out. I'm not saying that it's all evil. Just that was my impression. So.
Well, and the thing that I noticed in the mission work that I did, and again, I'm not out to in any way vilify.
Right. I'm not either. Please,
but what I saw and what I experienced, that's the frame that I'm speaking from.
Right.
Even in other countries, was the same thing. It was the same kind of marketing, and you would go. I would go to these developing nations, and the pastors would be practically demanding offerings, promising the people that they were going to be blessed, that they were going to have abundance. And so you would have pastors living way beyond the norm in their communities, while they had people in their church that literally, probably didn't have food for their family that day. But they would give in the offering plate because of the way it has been mass marketed and reproduced from America around the world.
Right.
It's sad.
Right. So I appreciate you sharing that. And that is, people may not realize that was kind of hard. You lost a lot of friends.
Yep.
You lost family from this. Yep. And you continue to speak out about how, in particular, when I follow your feed, you'll point out a belief that people, that just a common belief, and how it just tears through somebody's psychology and pathology. It creates a pathology. And there's several examples that you've done that where it can become abusive relationships. I wanted to get your impression of things that people maybe have learned from being in a heavily Christian family. That and this is not an anti-Christian podcast, but I'm saying that have maybe hurt them on their spiritual path or themselves psychologically.
Yeah. So this is pretty objective. So I don't know if you saw it, but when I did a survey,
right?
Those that have been hurt.
You did a survey.
What are your experiences?
Mm-hmm.
And publicly, I had about 300 responses to 2 different posts. Mm-hmm. But privately, I got a deluge of inbox messages. Right. People didn't want to share their experiences publicly, which I completely appreciate. The most wounded group of people out of that survey by far were women. And these were women, a lot of them in abusive relationships. And because Jesus said, in one place, if you divorce and remarry, you continue to be an adulteress. That's an adulterous relationship. Mm-hmm. And Paul said, wives, submit to your husbands. And so, right. And I know this as a pastor for a fact that people will come to you for counseling first before they'll go to a clinical mental health counselor.
Absolutely.
Get professional help. And we're not trained for that. That's one of the reasons I went back and got my degree in psychology and clinical mental health counseling, because I had no training for it. And it was the number one job that I was doing, was counseling people outside of preaching. Mm-hmm. And they would be given just this biblical counsel. And so many women who have been abused, who are in abusive relationships, who are told if you just pray more, if you just submit, if you're just the kind of wife that you're supposed to be, then God will, fix everything for you. Probably, Brian, this sort of magical thinking that we get stuck in, and right. This is in no way exclusive to Christianity.
Of course not.
But it can amplify it, because we can think, if I do this, then God's going to fix this problem for me. There were people who had children who died and were told by their leadership that they were in sin, that they didn't have enough faith, all kinds of different things.
Blaming them for the death of their children.
Yes, blaming them for the death of their children.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard 2 or 3 stories just in that short, little survey that I put out there. I had at least 2 or 3 people inbox me that was their experience.
Can you imagine feeling with that kind of guilt on a spiritual level?
Yeah, and not to mention that your church family, that's one of the reasons you get involved in church. One of the great things about church, right, to keep it positive, is that it is a great instrument for building community. And I know in my own experience, there were so many times that I had needs in my life that the church family, that the community came around and supported us and helped us and got us through those times. And so I couldn't imagine going through something so horrible as losing a child. And you would expect, I would think, from your community, support and compassion and help and assistance, but instead you get shamed and you get blamed for what happened to you. So you're carrying the spiritual frames, the mental frames, but you're also carrying the social shame that's being projected at you from the community that you're most looking to for support in that time. And I think that's tragic.
Right. And you had mentioned that some guys will say, hey, if you leave me, you won't have my spiritual protection anymore.
Oh, absolutely.
They'll use that as you'll be out in the wild and you won't have my special magical spiritual protection because I'm the one praying for you. Your prayers are irrelevant, right?
Yeah, kind of sounds like the mafia, doesn't it?
Right. You better not leave or you won't have God anymore because I'm your source of God.
Yeah. I could out prominent preachers, very prominent preachers.
Right.
Who I know for a fact used that on people that they were close to, that in fact did curse them. One person I can think of that, a lot of people would know if I said the name.
Right.
And someone very, very close to him, because this person disagreed and challenged, he told them they were going to get cancer because they come against the Lord's anointed, and then would see this person later in meetings or whatever and say, how are you feeling? Have you started to get sick yet?
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yep. And yet this person is promoted on platforms around the world.
So, if I can't believe that. I'm like in shock, like I'm stopped, like I couldn't believe.
Yeah. So you can understand why it wasn't just guts.
I can understand.
It wasn't just courage for me.
Why has Why has it become so political? You were there in that period of time when it wasn't, because I know when I was going to church in the 80s and following the news, it wasn't political. And it became political, like it was taken over by someone else. They said, oh, this is a large group of people. We can use this for our own power. And it distorted. It's left hundreds of people that have left the church because of it. And what is your impression? What happened historically? Why did it become so?
I think maybe one of the answers to that, and I'm just speculating, but I think one of the answers to that is we do live in a democracy, right? And so political power is gained by numbers. And so when you can find a collective group that thinks the same way,
right,
and as a politician, you can tap into the ideology of that group, then that's a big voting block or big voting chunk.
And it's worked.
That you can take advantage of. So I don't know if the church became more corrupt or if politicians became more sophisticated in saying the right things to tap into a voting block, but or if I just am seeing it differently now. Maybe it was going on in the 80s and I was too young and know that it was. But it does seem that the problem has gotten significantly worse since that time, for sure.
Perhaps because of money.
Because we're in a democracy.
Right. Perhaps because of that same drive for money.
Right.
You know.
And power and influence.
But a lot of the political, and I'm not trying to get political, but a lot of the clearly political positions taken by churches today are contradicting their own teachings.
Yes.
Supporting racist policies, or I could go through a list of things. You probably know what I'm talking about. That's the thing, is the cognitive dissonance with spiritual leaders that is so shocking.
Yeah, and again, I think that goes back to the core of the core of the Christian faith really is love God, love your neighbor, love yourself.
Right.
Or teaching, right? If we would just stay there, we would be okay.
We'd be okay.
And I think, there's healthy, that's healthy. But that core teaching is missing from mostly evangelical churches today.
Right.
And so I think that's another part of the problem, that stuff's not being taught, that stuff's not being modeled. It's not being lived out. It's not even necessarily an ideal anymore. And so as a result of that, the face that the church or much of the church world is putting on becomes uglier and more judgmental and more toxic.
Right. So when we get an understanding, when we look back, the thing that people should still realize, in my own experience, is that don't let that stuff dissuade you from reading the Bible. Jesus was one of the great teachers. You don't even have to believe, if you're an atheist, you do not have to even believe he was the Messiah. He was an incredible teacher of how to think, of a way of thinking. And so that's why I still come back to him. That's why we're still talking about him, because I still have faith in that teaching that Jesus gave me and how I see the world.
Right. I think a fundamental difference, or for me, because I still use the Bible every time I still draw from it a lot, but I can also recognize there are some really screwed up things in the Bible, some really messed up things in the Bible, not necessarily in the teachings of Jesus, more of it in the Old Testament, although there are
Leviticus.
Some things, there are some things even in the teachings of Jesus that I might take issue with and say, I'm not sure this is, the healthiest thing or even true. But I think the difference is that before I was biblical inerrant, I believed in biblical inerrancy, not necessarily always biblical literacy. I kind of understood probably Noah didn't really happen. Probably Jonah didn't really get swallowed by the fish or whatever. But I thought there were valuable lessons in there. But it was always the source of my faith and the rule of my conduct. In other words, I would seek in the best from the best intention and to the best of my ability to conform my life to the teachings of the scriptures. And I no longer do that. I don't believe that's healthy. So for me now, the scripture is one of many spiritual tools that I use to expand my consciousness, or to try to discover truth, or to try to reach that sort of just being a better person.
Right. Now, I was wondering if you ever got an impression of the Bible code. There's somebody that wrote a book where they had gone and cross-sectioned all of the Bible, and it literally predicts the future, and really fascinating stuff. I wondered if you had delved into any of that.
Not much. I remember when that was really popular, when that book came out, and
Yeah.
And people were using that, and I think I watched a few programs about it, whatever,
Right.
but I never delved into it much. No.
That would be interesting if it turned out that it was all had a secret code inside of it. So
Yeah.
But so on your path of discovery, is there anything that you can share with us? Any new teachings, new things that you can offer to the reality revolution that can expand our consciousness outside of the Bible? Because I know that you're, like me, always on seeking and learning and integrating new stuff all the time.
Yeah. I'll be honest, what I've been studying the most in the last several months has been the tarot, the teachings of the tarot. And most people understand tarot as a divination tool, as you go to a fair and get a tarot reading. But the truth is much deeper than that, in that the tarot cards were embedded with symbols identifying a spiritual path to liberation and liberation of the true self and enlightenment. And so I've been digging into the tarot as a spiritual path and the esoteric teachings that are in the tarot versus seeing it strictly as a divination tool or an oracle tool. So that's what
I know you've been exposed to the law of one, because you maybe talked about it with them. That's what they're talking about, that the tarot is not, and they have a whole section in the law of one where they may have brought portions of the tarot that we have today. There might have been other organizations, but there's a part of me that I've used the tarot and it's kind of told me about my future. And there's a part of me that still knows those biblical references that say, divination is bad and I shouldn't be divining anything. Even in other places that say that they'll lock you into a creation. But I agree with you. The symbols, there's something to tell me more about the aspects of my personality.
Just to help maybe you and some of your listeners with the whole divination thing. The word divination just means to desire to know the mind of God, to desire to know the will of God, because it comes from divine. It's not just about the future. It's divination, divining.
Right.
It's wanting to know the wisdom and the mind of God. So we can ask ourselves, is it appropriate for us to want to know the mind of God? Well, anyone that's engaged in anything like what we're talking about says yes. So the question is not, is divination right or wrong or good or bad? The question then becomes, what are appropriate or legitimized means of divination? What are illegitimate means of divination? Right. And then the church will tell you what that is. But in the Bible, they cast lots, excuse me, which was a form of divination.
Right.
The Book of Proverbs talks about that. And in fact, they cast lots to see which of the followers of Jesus would replace Judas.
Right.
New Testament. So that is a form of divination, using a divination tool to find the mind of God that's in the Bible. When Joseph, you remember Joseph, the guy with the coat of many colors and goes into Egypt, his brothers sell him into Egypt. When he is revealing himself to his brothers, he hides a cup in one of the knapsacks of one of his brothers, and then has the Egyptians go and arrest him and accuse him of stealing. It's this clever thing that he's designed. But the cup was significant because it was the cup that he used for divination.
Okay. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So I've always wanted to ask you also, with the possibility that we've had millions of years of different civilizations that have been on the earth in the past, doesn't sometimes when you read the Bible and some of these older spiritual, some of it's being written, it seems like, by people that know that have seen religions spring up in vast civilizations before, and it came with an agenda, knowing how this is going to be a sacred book, because we had those sacred books before, and it was written with an agenda, knowing how it would be received as a Bible, as if other Bibles had been written in the past. Like they're getting better at it. Have you ever had that thought? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that thought.
Right, because and so who knows if that's true or not? But
You wonder what knowledge was lost in the ancient libraries, like the Alexandrian
yeah,
library.
you absolutely wonder what happened with Alexandria, and
Yeah.
you really, really wonder what was going on pre-flood. If you believe in the flood, or if there's an aspect of the flood story, because there is flood stories in many different
Right.
societies and cultures. There's
Right.
also ice ages in some cultures that seem maybe there was a global event that caused an environmental catastrophe, and portions of the earth were flooded. And so maybe the story of Noah is symbolic, but there. So you get the impression that there may have been other religions and other Bibles before in the pre-flood era, and now that the earth's wiped out, there's people with this knowledge that say, "Oh, we can start all over. We
Yeah.
can have our own Bible this time, and we know how everybody. We can. This is going to be fun. I mean, imagine you and I. We know the whole thing. We can do our own Bible this time, right? We can."
Yeah.
They had to be thinking like this stuff that we're doing now is gonna define Earth as we know it, right?
Yeah. 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 I love it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but so I'm trying to think what else we've covered. Pretty much, we covered the Merkaba, and we covered Ezekiel, and the other thing that I've had biblically, since I have you here, is, do you know the source of Psalms or Proverbs? Is it multiple different authors? I've been finding some of the. I mean, I'm a fan of affirmations,
Mm-hmm.
and Joseph Murphy, and some
Yeah.
of these Psalms and Proverbs, they feel like magic spells. This is a different
Yeah.
part of the Bible that is not like the rest of the Bible, and I've wondered, has there been a study of what is the source of these of the Proverbs and Psalms? Is it a collection of different authors?
Yeah, it's it's clearly Psalms for sure is clearly a collection of different authors.
Right.
Because even according to the traditions, you'll see a Psalm of Asaph or a Psalm of David,
Mm-hmm.
and so these were hymns or songs that was part of the Hebraic tradition. So it's their songbook actually,
Right.
collection of songs by different authors. Traditionally, it goes back to the time of David. I'm not really sure what the latest biblical scholarship on that is in terms of dating. And then Proverbs, is historically and traditionally given to the authorship of Solomon, King Solomon. But again, it's probably a collection because Proverbs were something that was very much part of ancient cultures, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was probably a collection of wisdom writings or whatever that, again, was put together probably sometime 800 BC.
Right.
But had been around as part of the oral tradition for, who knows, maybe millennia before that.
Right. So maybe we'll find out more of that. But I have found that the words, when used, the ideas in those seem to have a magical power and have
Absolutely.
a magical effect on me personally and my own emotions. But even outside of, like, if this is how to pray, this is if you pray using this structure, it seems to work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely believe that. I had a friend who was meditating on a passage from Psalms, and it went something like, "I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies." And had spent a lot of time meditating on that and reciting that, affirming that. And later that day, she was moving. She was in the process of moving in with her husband. I think they had just gotten married, and she was moving from her apartment into his house. And he had taken a load of her stuff and left her there by herself. And she had an intruder break in and attempt to rape her. Got her on the floor. Actually, got her pants off. And she just called out to Jesus. She said, "Jesus, help me." And she said the man turned completely pale, froze, let her go, and took off running, scared, out of her apartment. And so, that seems to make sense that she was meditating and affirming, "I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be my enemies."
There's nothing political about that or complicated. That's what they're so beautiful. So,
yeah.
For somebody that's a recovering Christian,
Yeah.
that maybe have accessed this, and they're in that place between. And it's a sad and lonely place. You lose family, you lose friends, you question your own self. I mean, it's hard to lose those structures that are around. What can they do? What do you recommend? What's the first step? Let's give them a place to start.
Yeah, the first thing I would say to people in that situation is you are not alone. This is a phenomenon that's happening all over the world to a lot of people at this time. And so it really is a movement. Now, you probably feel like you're all alone because, again, this isn't like giving up your belief in Santa Claus. And here's the thing, Brian, the people that are the most committed and the most devout are usually the ones who get the most wounded.
Right.
Because their entire identity, their entire world, their entire social structure revolves around this. And so I just want to encourage you that, if people out there that are going through this and experiencing this, that this is something that God is doing, that God is leading you in this path and in this way. Now, a lot of people end up, kind of leaving Christianity and becoming atheists.
Right.
And everybody's got their own, journey and their own path to walk. But I think the first thing I would just want to say is to encourage that person. And then the second thing I would say is get into some kind of meditation. Meditation is going to be so important. So you've got some tremendous resources, Brian, on your channel that with meditation that they can take and implement, but getting some kind of a consistent, and by consistent, I don't mean it has to be every day, but relatively often, where you're taking time and getting into meditation so you can find your own voice and find the voice of your own heart and find what I believe is the voice of the Spirit of God in your heart.
Right.
To help lead you and guide you through this, because everybody's got a different path and there's not a one-size-fits-all answer for everybody that's going through this process. But just know that you're not alone.
And God may have put you through all of that on purpose. He wanted you to have those old beliefs on purpose so that you can have this unveiling and awakening. It's all a part of the process, which is really amazing. A lot of people that leave that have been literally told hundreds, thousands of times that meditation is evil.
Right.
That meditation is evil. So it's very hard for them. Okay, even though they've accepted this new belief, but they have those thousands of times. So they start to meditate and almost immediately they feel the guilt or shame or concern they're going to hell for this meditation. And I've always wondered why that. I mean, I in college, one of my roommates, a good friend of mine, his father was a pastor and he was very devout Christian. He caught me meditating in my room and he was like, Brian, you can't do that. You're going to let evil spirits come in and you can really destroy your soul. You could, and I want you to talk to and he begged me to talk to his father and come to the church because he thought that, I'm in big trouble. My whole spiritual life could be over. I could be bringing. And so I know people are having those thoughts sometimes when they say, okay, I can meditate. Right.
Yeah.
Where is that coming from?
Well, it depends on a person's background and tradition, but a lot of it is, I was taught any kind of guided visualization. Any kind of opening your mind, emptying your mind, quieting your mind, stilling your mind would open you up to demons. Tarot cards would open you up to demons. I mean, that was a surefire way.
Everything opens you to demons, right?
Surefire way to get demons. But was
they're just waiting.
And all I can say is that with full knowledge of that, full awareness of that teaching and that indoctrination, that I took a chance, 4 or 5 years ago and said, all this stuff that everybody told me I was going to get demons from, I'm going to check it out and see. Right. And it's funny, it's funny, Brian, when I think about it now, because I knew people that had deliverance ministries where they would cast out demons, they get you to repent of all that stuff that you did, and they cast the demons out of you, whatever. And I thought to myself, well, if I get a demon, I know where to go to get it out. But I was literally scared.
That's what you thought.
Really scared. Now, not so much with meditation, because there is a contemplative prayer tradition that runs throughout Christianity that is very similar to Eastern forms of meditation. Right. So I wasn't as much afraid of meditation because it had a Christian root or whatever. Right. But man, the first time I went to like a metaphysical fair and had somebody do energy work on me, the first time I had somebody do Reiki on me, the first time I got a card reading,
you were thinking,
I was literally trembling.
Right.
oh, I'm going to get a demon. And I just want to say from my own experience, in the last, 4 years that I still haven't, I haven't gotten physically sick. I haven't come down with depression, or, I haven't had weird knockings at my house or visitations, or, all these sort of evidences of demonic entities.
Right.
But instead I've grown in my peace and in my joy and my compassion. And Jesus said you would know them by their fruits. And so if I had to judge by fruit, then I would say that, I think it's good to still be discerning. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Not everybody that's telling you your fortune is got your best interest at heart, just like not every preacher has your best interest at heart. But the tool itself, and specifically meditation, is not something it's something you've been programmed to be afraid of, but it's not something that in reality it is to be afraid of. So in this case, the map is not the territory. Your map is, you've been told tarot is dangerous. You've been told meditation's dangerous. You've been told Reiki or energy work or law of one or whatever, channeling, whatever is dangerous. Mm-hmm. But that's a map. And I can definitely tell you the map is not the territory.
Absolutely. So one thing I've told friends that are in that same place that has worked a little bit is that when you were praying, you were meditating. You were just talking to God, and now you're just listening.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's a relationship you have with God, and God loves to hear you talk, but sometimes he wants you to listen. Okay, that makes sense, because it's a relationship. That's what we have with God. And if you're in a relationship with somebody that does all the talking, then it gets kind of old, right? And God's like, okay, I'm waiting for you to stop talking. I know what you want to pray. I know everything about you, but just be quiet just for a little bit,
I love that.
Evidence of Jesus being still multiple times in stillness and silence. But I know there are people that are listening to this that still have those thoughts, that are starting to embrace these ideas. And I just want to take away the fear. I have never met anybody that's had a demon from meditation. I've never met anybody that's had any sort of demon from meditation. So I hopefully people can.
Well, and the benefits even scientifically are out there. They've scientifically proven that it improves your immune system, that it can help stop swelling in the limbic system of the brain. It has all kinds of, it can change the structure of the hippocampus. It can activate use of the frontal lobe more, and that's all scientifically proven. So it's very beneficial. And I love what you say. And I think one thing I would say to recovering Christians, or Christians who are still seeking, who maybe are questioning their faith or whatever.
Right.
We have had this stuff repeated to us every Sunday, reinforced throughout the week, whether it's in Bible study or Christian music or books that we were reading or messages that we were listening to or whatever. And so your subconscious, I love Dr. Bruce Lipton says, the subconscious is like a recording device.
Right.
So it's just picked that message up so many times that it literally becomes part of your physiology, becomes embedded in your body, in your nervous system. And it takes time to change that programming. So you may logically be able to know, okay, Brian, what you're saying, that makes sense. There's nothing wrong with meditation. I'm gonna be okay if I meditate. And then you sit down and meditate and you start feeling afraid.
Right. It's a reaction. It's a mental programming that we need. It goes beyond beliefs. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. And that's all that repeated in imprinting of the subconscious mind that just continues to play. There is life after that. There is freedom from that. But it does take time, and it's a normal part of the process.
What do you say to a couple where one person is heavily Christian and one person has now seen the light, as we're talking about, going through that recovery? Maybe these people aren't together, but maybe they have kids that they have to raise. And so the Christian is going to say that and indoctrinate. What would you say to the person that is on the other side of that wants to maintain a good, wholesome family relationship but doesn't want to conflict? But how do you teach your kids? How do you deal with because they're still, once you're going through the recovery period, you're going to be dealing with people in your family and around you that have those beliefs. And especially they're going to be teaching things that you may not believe. Is there any recommendations that you would suggest in those cases?
Yeah, that is a tough situation, because you got to remember that the person who's coming from the Christian paradigm believes that their beliefs are an issue of eternal salvation, of heaven and hell.
Eternal salvation, right.
And so they're going to be automatically afraid if someone programs their kids to not believe like them, that potentially their children could go to hell.
Right.
And their spouse also. I was very fortunate because my wife and I walked this journey out together, and ended up on the same page.
Helpful.
Yeah, very much so. So with the children, that that's tough. I would say to the person who is awake, what I would call awakening, or having different thoughts from the Christian community, to be mindful of the fact that is where that person's coming from. So their intention of their heart is loving,
right?
Even though the actions and behaviors and strategies may not appear so, and may even, in fact, be destructive. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage you with that. And also, I would say this: I am a believer that we did choose. I loved what you said earlier. If you're coming out of this stuff, it was part of the plan for you to get into the stuff to begin
in the first place, right?
Given me so much peace and so much help to realize that I needed that in my journey. And I'm able to watch other people. It's so funny, Brian, right now I've got a few people that are leaving what they call the New Age or the Eastern religions, or this oneness idea, for Christianity, because they had an experience where, Jesus showed them he was the way, the truth, and the life, and
right.
They're going hardcore into fundamentalism, right? And I'm able to sit back and relax and not feel the need to stop them, because I understand this is what their soul needs right now. This is what their soul needs for growth and expansion and whatever. This is absolutely the path they need to go on right now. And I can actually encourage them in that path, right, while sharing, this is why I don't, choose that path myself. So I would encourage people that your children also, they need the experiences, and had perhaps even some choice in choosing you as their parents. And so, and kids are smart, right? And so if I were in that situation, I definitely would want to have my voice heard with my children. I would definitely want to present maybe something else. And I would encourage you to do that. I would not be afraid to do that. You have every right, especially, if you're divorced or separated, you still have the right to parent that child. And so on the one hand, I would say, understand where they come from. On the other hand, I would say, don't back down. And then the balance between the two would be, this is all for the benefit and the growth of your child's soul.
I love it. I'm sure that there'll be other questions I have, because that's the nature of what we talk about spiritually. And so I guarantee we're going to have Aaron back, because he's our resident expert on the Bible and so many other things. And I just always enjoy talking with you. And I learn so much every time. Everybody needs to check out Aaron's YouTube channel and like him on Facebook. You are talking about stuff on Facebook as well. And it's an open discussion of these ideas. And so thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I'll start writing down my questions for the next time around.
Awesome. Brian, I just want to encourage you, man. I love what you're doing. I think you are a tremendous gift. I think your channel is a tremendous gift to, I don't know, I call it the awakened community, but just to the world at large and to humanity at large. And it's just great to see your channel growing, and the stuff that you're putting out there, I think, is such a resource for people. So I know it's a lot of work. I know it's a lot of work, because I haven't been able to keep up with my YouTube channel.
Well, that means more than you can imagine. It does. I appreciate that a lot. That's my goal. So thank you.
Yeah, brother, you're doing an awesome job, and really on the front lines of what I really believe God is doing right now, which is this whole restructuring and awakening.
You think something unique is happening spiritually? Oh, I know we're about to end this, but suddenly the question.
That's okay.
Do you feel like something unique is happening spiritually in awakenings? Everybody likes to talk about a great awakening, but do you think that from your sense, and it's always a personal experience of reality, but in your sense of what other people are going through spiritually, this is different?
Yeah, it is. The last thing I did on Facebook was on the Christ in the Aquarian Age. And I do believe that we've shifted from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And I think there has to be a passing away of the old before there can be a real coming in of the new. Mm-hmm. And I think we are at the very beginning process of that. We're feeling the birth pains of that, where the age is just a child.
Right. I agree.
And so I think the awakening that's happening to a large degree, what we're seeing is the dissolution, people letting go of the old structures mm-hmm. that were part of the Piscean age, or they're fighting tooth and toenail and with everything they have to maintain the order of the structures of the previous age. And so I think you see the tension of both of those. So I think it's a very, very, very significant time to be alive. And I think there is something tremendous that God is doing, that is happening in the consciousness of many, many, many people. And I think there was something to that 2012 date, you know.
There has been a change since that time. Everybody expected the world to end, but I think consciously, just in my own relationships and awareness, a lot of different things, it's easy for me to just automatically create that. I know that my own biases, but it does feel like there has been, and like I talked with Aaron Abke, there's humanity evolves slowly. Everybody expected some big flash, and everybody turns into suns, and they're floating around.
Right. No. Yeah, Aaron Abke and I call that kind of the New Age version of the rapture teachings.
Right. That's not what was going to happen. All of nature, if you look at nature, is slow. It's a slow developing and evolution, and that's what we're seeing with us. It's a slow evolutionary change. For God, it's a minute, but so maybe when we're hearing from channeled beings, they think of it as it's happening right now, but really it's a long, slow process. We're part of a garden, and the plants are being developed, and I don't know, that's what it.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I was reading Paul Foster Case. I don't know if you've looked at any of his.
No, I don't. That doesn't sound familiar, but now I got to write it down.
But he made this statement. Of course, he's a spiritual teacher, and he believes that we are eternal beings, and he believes in reincarnation. And he said, approach whatever you're working on in your life. And in this context, he's talking about spiritual practice, but in general, anything you're working on in your life, like you have all the time that there is, because in fact you do. You do. And he encourages people to not be in a hurry.
Not be in a hurry, exactly.
I thought that was good wisdom for this day and age.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and welcome to the Reality Revolution.
Hey, man. Good to be with you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Go Broncos. Yes, absolutely. Go Broncos.
Well, welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm just really excited today because this is the first day that my book is released. This is it. The Reality Revolution. Worked on this for a very long time. So many of the things that I discovered along the way, and I was excited to share it with everybody. Tell you a little bit about it. I'm like everybody else. I'm interacting in the world and starting to realize that my thoughts created reality. As I did this, I started to see some major shifts in my reality. I started to explore the idea of maneuvering through parallel realities. I'm your host, Brian Scott.